Well, welcome everybody to a very cool edition of Travillian Next. Uh, for one, we have Brian Love, the head of banking and fintech from Travillian, here on with us. But we also have father and son, Dion and Dylan, from 40 Grand. And Dylan's living the good life, man. He's in college right now, I think going into his junior year, playing lacrosse. But he has taken a liking to banking and kind of understanding the fintech world. So Brian and I thought it'd be a great idea to interview or just have a jam session, as we call it, with father and son. New generation, Dion, I don't want to say old generation, but
very old.
And how that landscape is changing, and what Brian and I are seeing out there also. So welcome, Brian, Dion, and Dylan. And I'll kick it over to Dion to give kind of a, just a brief overview of your career and 40 Grand and what you're working on these days.
That sounds great. Thanks, Keith. Yeah, good to be here. And it is kind of funny working with my son on something. I remember my dad was blue collar, and my brothers all worked with him in the sheet metal shop back in the day, and I never got a chance to. So this is great for me. But so I build myself as the Rosetta Stone between legacy bank and fintech startups. And having been in fintech startups over the years, as well as the largest bank in the world, Citi, largest payment processor in the world, First Data, done ventures, invested in startups, worked with startups, all around fintech for, let's just say, more years than I care to remember. Right now, what I'm working on, 40 Grand, is a partnership between myself and a couple of investment bankers out of LA, Mike and Carlton. And what they do is they do investment banking for community banks. And Carlton used to run one of the largest minority-owned community banks on the West Coast in LA. And we got together and said, community banks are falling behind. Deposits are going to the big banks. Fintech's coming in, big tech's coming in, Google, Amazon spend billions on R&D. What are these banks going to do, right? And so we started 40 Grand with an eye to help. And I know we have a lot of mutual friends, Brian, Keith, and I, in the community bank landscape. And so this summer, Dylan, due to his lacrosse commitment, was a couple units short for a full load. So he asked me if he could do some interning at 40 Grand. I said, as long as we treat it serious, absolutely. So he's become my social media manager. And as part of that, he started to dig into his own banking journey. How do I establish credit? How do I get my own checking, debit, all that? And it is funny, and it's interesting for me because I really see this as a focus group of one. Here's this Gen X, almost millennial guy deciding how to bank. And I'm like, well, I have a lot of expertise in banking, but I don't want him to take on my horrible finance decisions. I want him to do his own journey. And so Dylan's been doing social media for 40 Grand for the summer, and finishes up here in a couple of weeks.
Dylan, I guess maybe to dive in, and my background's boring, 10 years in banking. I had a lot of fun, and then about 6 years now recruiting in the community bank space. But I really am excited about experience, customer experience. And I think that kind of parlays into what we were discussing on our last conversation. You're a 20-year-old, you're starting to open bank accounts, you're starting to wonder, how to get your financial, self ready, for the rest of your life. I'd love to hear some high-level takeaways of some of those experiences, and then maybe we can all kind of chime in on some of that.
Yeah, my experience so far is there's a pretty wide variety of services offered, and you can really, honestly, with any bank I look at, any financial service, right away you can kind of tell this is not where it needs to be, or it is. And what I'm looking for in terms of my consumer habits, I'd say, is I'm looking for a great digital experience. And my generation, me specifically, but I think my generation as a whole, really values the digital experience in terms of got to have a great app, website, and you're just going to be able to reach my generation the best through my phone, essentially. And just that is, that's the best way to reach me. And I'm going to avoid going into, say, a bank branch or a phone call if possible. If I could just download your app, set up an account, or do it on my computer through a website. And so my biggest takeaway so far is banks or financial institutions that can accommodate that without having to go through all these extra steps like getting in my car, then those are going to stand out to me the most.
Hey, Dylan, the other day we were talking and I said, and Brian, I think you and I had a similar experience. My first credit card was Citibank on campus at Cal Poly a number of years ago. There was a little table set up and I went by, I got the credit card. I kept that damn thing for 20 plus years. Lifetime value of me as a customer from the $500 limit in college to today. Dylan, would you stop by a table on your college campus and fill out a paper to get any financial products?
To be honest, no, I absolutely would not. If I was walking by and there's a table and, guy flags me down and says, hey, you want to sign up for a credit card? I'd be like, sorry, man, maybe next time, just ignore him. I just got my Discover student card. And I completed that process all online, start to finish, probably 10 to 15 minutes. Just put in your social, loaded, and then is in the mail. So I think like a process as easy as that is super important.
Yeah, Brian, Keith, you'll appreciate this. So he lives with his mom today in Concord. I live over in Marin. The card came to my house. He didn't even think about getting the physical card. He just called me and said, hey, Dad, take a picture of the card, send it to me so I have the number so I can use it online. Right. Whereas I would have been freaking out that I didn't have the physical card yet.
Yeah, but I did ask you, Dylan, about Apple Pay and that type of thing. And when we were talking about it, it wasn't that important to you, which was kind of surprising to me.
Yeah.
Because, you're the generation that lives on your phone. So
I used the pictures my dad sent, and I put it in Apple Pay. And then they're super
game
easy.
changer. I love it.
I was like, wow. I was like, it's like I have my card with me, and like I haven't even seen the physical card yet, but I have access to it. I was able to activate it through their app. Took about 5 seconds to my Apple Pay, so it's like I'm all ready to go. And I don't even have the physical card, and haven't been to a bank, haven't been on the phone or nothing.
Yeah, but Dylan, like you chose a Discover card for your first credit card. I mean, what was the analysis? What algebra did you use to get to that? I got to be honest. I wanted to leave you alone on this journey and see where you landed. Full disclosure for everyone listening, Discover used to be a big client of mine. I'm not pushing towards them at all. I realize, like any legacy system, they have their issues. What led you to pick Discover out of all the credit cards you could have picked?
Yeah, so choosing a credit card, I have relatively limited options as first credit card, no credit really. So I was largely comparing student cards, and a bunch of different banks offer something like that. And Discover pretty much had the best perks, I guess you could say, and that kind of drew my attention. They offer like a 5% cash back, and then they even offer an incentive to get good grades every year. It's like $30 or something, but not huge. And all those perks kind of grabbed my attention in comparison to the one con I found was that Discover is not accepted everywhere. Mm-hmm. But even in just the last couple of days of having Discover, I've noticed I even went into a thrift store, and just right on the door, they said, Discover accepted here. And I'm like, if a place like this can accept Discover, then I'm not really going to be running into any problems. And so, and they also have a great app, which, as I said earlier, really stands out to me and is really important. So, so I've had Wells Fargo for years, and their app is my biggest complaint. It's slow. It's archaic, to be completely honest with you. And Discover is just better in pretty much every conceivable way I've found so far, but, I'm still getting into it.
Discover has Zelle. We talked about, P2P, moving money. Zelle, I was actually pleasantly surprised coming from the Venmo world and PayPal world and using Zelle a few times to pay, to send money to my mom. It was pretty easy. And Discover has that. And a lot of community banks have access to Zelle. So my question is really about my community bank brethren who are hanging in there. They're lagging as well, but they're trying to do their thing. From your perspective, Dylan, what do you think smaller community banks can do to maybe win over millennials?
Yeah.
Or sorry, you're Gen Z.
Gen Z, yes.
I was corrected there. Thank you. Yeah.
So if you're a community bank and you want to win over someone in my generation, digitally innovating is, I'd say, got to be the number one thing. Because let's say I download your app, for example, and it's just not up to par with, say, one of the big banks, it's just not going to make me want to stick with it. And if you're not able to offer the features like P2P payments, like the great perks, clean app, good website, customer service, like if you're not able to offer those things, there's not much of an incentive to go with a community bank. So for a community bank to win me over, or a fellow Gen Z, it's got to be easy to sign up. I don't want to go through the whole hassle. And after I've signed up, it's got to be modern more than anything else, and just have all those capabilities that like people in my generation are looking for, digitally speaking.
And Dion, I mean, just to pass you that same question, since you cover the same community bank sector at 40 grand, what's your answer to that? How can community banks lure those younger people, consumer and business, frankly?
Yeah, a great question, Brian. It's funny because a lot of the banks I deal with have really emphasized B2B because they're finding it hard to compete with the marketing budgets of a Chase, a Wells, or a bank that Dylan likes, Chime, some of these other ones that are just great at marketing. And so a community bank's like, well, we can't even compete with that. We'll just focus on small business. Well, even there, if some small business guy is going to hand off his business to his son or his daughter next gen, well, that person is going to use different algebra, just as Dylan and I have, to end up on their financial journey. And I think the hardest thing for community banks is being stuck in the past with their, old male, pale, and stale board of directors. Their executives average probably older than me or as old as me. And I just think they need a lens and a way to think, and maybe focus group of one like this with a Gen Z or millennial if they want to go after that. But not only the consumer side of that, but the new business leaders, right? So if I've got a plumber that comes to my house, I rent, and he comes out and services, and his kids are planning to take over his business someday. Well, they're going to look at that business and business banking different than their dad does, right? And I just think community banks, the other day I was tweeted out something about community banks have to figure out how to recruit the best and brightest. Maybe Brian, you and Keith can come up with something, but like take Dylan, he's going to graduate with a business degree in a couple of years. How would a community bank recruit someone like that? I'll turn that over to you, Brian and Keith. Like, community banks need younger, bright people coming in with new ideas. Step one, how do they recruit them?
What I was going to say is culture is also very important. Just as Dylan chose Discover for certain reasons, their experience of the app made him potentially feel a certain way, confidence, progression in technology. That's where I think the culture needs to change at these organizations, because things that align with Dylan's generation around, working remotely, maybe social causes, different type of PTO structure, being compensated specific ways with incentives, even specific health benefits for, whatever it may be. That's where banks, I think, can really very quickly and easily change their culture, change their storytelling, and attract some of these younger candidates with substantial expertise in coding and technology and these other things that the fintechs seem to really have a monopoly on, talent-wise. And I think I don't think it's actually that hard of a stretch to do something like that, and really do it quickly. It really just comes from the top and needs to kind of permeate the organization. So I just wanted to get that out there.
No. Let me build on it for a sec. I saw a job description that kind of caught my eye. Solutions architect for a small to mid-sized bank. And I'm like, would they even know what to do with that in their organization? To your point, Brian, what's the culture that some best and brightest techie is going to go join, Bob's community bank and be the only techie there, or solutions architect? And I just wonder, because 40 grand, we kind of try to position ourselves as an outsourced chief digital officer. We'll give you what you're doing right, what you need to improve, how to digitize a lot of process. But then as I sit with these bankers, I'm not going to lie, a lot of them, these processes they're using to onboard or to service customers, they're 15 years old, the process itself. And so if you just layer on digital tech, you're not going to solve the process. I had this experience. I opened a business bank account. I won't name the very large bank, and they allowed me to go in twice to open the account because the process was slightly off the first time, but I gave the exact same information both times. I'm like, a millennial would have been like, I'm out.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Done.
But I took my two kids to open an account. It took an hour to open two savings accounts. And honestly, my children then they link frustration and boredom with banks. And if they didn't have nice lollipops and a free change machine, that bank is never going to see us again. One thing that I was going to mention that's parents helping children with their finances and how community banks fit into that is there are a load of those banks at the crossroads of community banking and fintech. You've got Evolve that is behind that app Step. You've got Lincoln Savings behind Acorns. You got Coastal Community behind Aspiration, and you've got what I use with my son, Current, which is Choice Financial up in Fargo, North Dakota. That's kind of helping with the banking plumbing behind that. But again, that's a creative way that community banks are getting involved in, really embracing Dylan's generation.
So Dylan, so apps, digital, online, low friction. What else is going to appeal to someone in your generation? What apps? Well, not even what apps. What services would you want? Like, have you even thought about saving or investing?
He wants free checks, right? Free checks. Free checks.
And a toaster.
People used to want that, right?
Toaster.
I know. Toaster.
In terms of like other stuff, so savings is interesting. I don't think a whole ton about saving. Not saying I don't per se, but obviously not having a regular paycheck or anything like that, I'm not really hitting the money amounts where that's super important to me yet. But in the near future, obviously I graduate within the next 2 years. That's gonna be huge, and that's something I'm starting to think about, as well as investing too. Haven't quite gotten into that yet, but that's definitely on the horizon and something I, as well as other people in my generation, are definitely looking for. I mean, you mentioned Aiden with the cryptocurrency, and people and a lot of my peers are really into that stuff. And obviously that's a form of investment, and that is, I think, hugely important.
Culture. So let's bring this thing home. I wanted to ask Dylan maybe just a final question, and Dion, especially since you're a 20-year-old Gen Zer, what are some financial, either institutions or apps or even just regular technology that excites you?
I would say looking at Chime definitely excited me. I would say it's not quite where I wanted it to be when I was looking at it recently, but I think they're exciting to watch as they grow in the future, and maybe it could be something I'm looking for. And then I know we also talked about Venmo. I mean, I know Venmo is already huge, but I think they can even become more. And I think Venmo, I know we talked about the P2P payments within banks. And Venmo is exciting to watch in terms of the technology itself. And if I could see something like Venmo being input to like my bank, like I'd love to not use Venmo and just do it through my banking app.
Embedded finance.
Yeah,
Sure.
I know I've talked about this before in my blogs, but if I'm under the impression that if a service is not fulfilled, then a third party will just do it instead. So for example, like if your bank doesn't have P2P, then someone else like Cash App or Venmo or whoever is going to step in and fill that service, because consumers' needs are going to be met regardless. And I find that exciting to watch and kind of to see where that progresses.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I think for me in Chime, I blogged this out a while back. I think it's pretty interesting. Chime had a valuation of about $30 billion, and they're the front end of banking. They're customer acquisition, they're the UX, they're the cool app Dylan talks about. But behind them are Galileo, Bank Corp, and some others who do the actual banking. Their combined valuation was about $6 to $7 billion. So the lesson here is be that front end, because that's where the money is, at least in an investment perspective, because it's visible, people get it. Now, I'm not against banking infrastructure, Plaid, others, they're great. Stripe, great valuations, but the Chime example really shows you, if you can appeal to a customer like a Dylan or his brother Aiden or others in that, call it 18 to 30 range, with really good user UX and app and interaction and low friction, I tell you, it's limitless what you can do. And those are the people who are going to pull the customers from Wells Fargo. And community banks need to wake up and start to think like this. And the way to do that, Brian, you keep beating the drum, and I agree, change your culture. I was talking to a community bank down in Arizona. We were talking about people coming back from COVID. He's like, yeah, I look forward to everyone coming to the office 9 to 5, 5 days a week. And I'm like, you're not going to recruit the people you need with that attitude. Like, you got to be flexible. You got to change that work culture. But I think culture, if they can address that, I think community banks really have a chance. Take advantage of what Keith talked about, local, local first, be local, support your local business. It's a real unique opportunity, and I hope they wake up to it.